Welcome everyone to another great episode of the Do Better Dev Show. I am here with Nathan, just a plain simple classic developer.
Perfect.
How you doing, Nathan?
I'm doing great. Thanks for asking. We talked about it a little bit before the show. I'm just feeling good. I don't know why. You were surprised. But yeah, feeling good. How are you today?
Oh, I'm doing great. My co-host is having a really good day and he's feeling really good. So, yeah, besides that, I have tons of injuries for some reason on my upper body right now. And yeah, things hurt.
All right. Good stuff. Anything you want to mention from the past week? It's not been a full week since we recorded, just because we're recovering our schedule from travel. But from the last 4 or so days, got anything to report on?
Yeah. Since I live on the awesome mainland, there is lots of events going on as COVID is dying down. More events are opening up, and we have this event in Richmond called the Richmond Night Market, which is opening up, and it's hella cool, and I'm really looking forward to it. Mostly because of their food and colorful lights. So yeah, probably gonna go there this weekend. And another cool thing I figured out about my laptop is the USB-C port doubles as a charging port. So if I plug in my MacBook charger USB-C into my Dell laptop, it starts charging it, which is handy in I don't know what situation I'll run into where I'll need it, but I just learned about it and I thought that was pretty cool because that USB-C won't even if you plug in a USB-C to HDMI, I can't get an external screen, so I'm limited by one external screen through the HDMI port on the motherboard. But it's cool to know that besides normal peripherals, it also has charging capability because I thought it was just useless.
Well,
yeah,
it's better than useless then.
Exactly. It has some use, not quite as useful, but not fully useless, just like me.
Right.
So how was your week?
Going for the sweet spot. My week was pretty good. Didn't do a whole lot over the weekend. Just played a bunch of guitar. Actually played enough to where my fingers hurt, which hadn't happened in a while. Yeah, got outside. Didn't do anything terribly exciting, which kind of made sense. It was almost... I didn't put any effort in to find something very exciting to do after the previous 2 weeks of doing something pretty much every day. So I was like, let's just let myself be a little bit bored. But since the last recording, I thought I'd mention that we watched The Green Knight, and it was a strange movie. I don't know whether to call it, I guess it's interesting of the 3 adjectives we usually use, and frustrating too. So spoiler alert if you don't want to be spoiled. Green Knight, I'm not even going to be specific about the plot. Just the ending is just a real disappointment. Unlike you, I was very into the movie, and it's a very artsy film. I had no idea what was going on pretty much the whole time, mostly because I could understand maybe 25% of what was said. And then it got to the end of the movie, and all the stuff that I thought was building up to something just didn't mean anything. It just didn't really seem to pay off. I watched a review by Jeremy Johns because he does like 6-7 minute reviews, and he's got a lot of energy, so easy to watch. And I've been watching his stuff for a long time, and he loved it. He was like, "This movie needed to happen. It was like super important for fantasy movies in 2021." And I went, "All right, I guess it's for somebody, but it wasn't for you or I or anybody else that we saw the movie with." And other than that, I don't know why, I decided to buy blue cheese stuffed olives, and they're delicious. So I ate a couple of those earlier today, and I was shocked at how good they were. I went to the grocery store with a particular goal in mind, and I'll get to it in my do-betters. But one of the things I ended up leaving with were blue cheese stuffed olives. And I don't really buy olives, and I can't say I know anything about cheese. But for some reason these stood out, and I bought them, and it was a great choice. So recommend, I guess. Recommend olives, don't necessarily recommend Green Knight.
Blue cheese, not green knight.
Exactly. Yeah.
Okay.
That's the takeaway.
So we
Hashtag value.
hashtag value. This is the value this podcast provides, you know. Now, if somebody was debating between going to the grocery store and theater, they can clearly just go to the grocery store.
Well, that's what I'm saying. They cost almost exactly the same. I think the jar of olives I got was around $8. That's about what a ticket was. So you could either have a tasty experience that lasts over many days, or a disappointing experience that lasts over a couple hours.
That's true. Or you could be one of those people in the theater who just left in the first 10 minutes for some reason.
Or that left halfway through.
Yeah.
It was like...
They just figured it's too much. They don't need any of it.
That was before we were even let down by the changing events. They were at like the part when I was the most into it. You were still preparing to nap, but...
Yeah. Yeah. Well, it was I don't know. It was... again... I liked the ending. Didn't like the most of it, and yeah, it's and everyone might be wondering why we're talking about this movie too much, and it's because we changed our minds on it by the end, which is a big segue into what we're going to talk about today.
Oh, that was a stretch, but
Thank
you got us there. So, yeah, one of the things I thought we could discuss today, because I saw a different podcast was doing a what we got wrong episode, and it made me think, and then it made me think of the common Tim Ferriss question. I don't know if he still asks it. This is what he asked 5-6 years ago when I listened to his show. But he would ask what people changed their minds on recently. And I thought, all right, between those two things, it gave me the idea. Let's do something like that if we can come up with topics that we've gotten, or that we've changed our mind on, and just hash it out. So I don't know. I don't remember the ones you even sent me. So I know none of yours, and I haven't sent you any of mine. So this should largely be a surprise. How many do you have in your list?
Couple. I have like 7 or 8.
Oh, perfect. So you go first then. What's
Okay.
the first thing that you have changed your mind on that you want to talk about?
The very first thing that I thought about as a junior developer early on in my tech was programming languages are interchangeable. I kept thinking they're all the same. It was just a matter of style or how they evolved over time. While there is some truth to it, most programming languages are built to target a certain area of expertise or some problem they're trying to solve. So even though there are many languages in similar families, they all have their different strengths and areas of expertise they target. So that was something I changed my mind on as I learned more languages. Because in the beginning, I just learned syntax and basic quirks of different languages, and I figured whatever I want to build, I can build in all of these languages. And I did. One of the ways I learn languages is I build a calculator app. It's my go-to. The business use case is extremely simple. It just has enough complexity that I can learn different data types and how return methods work. And I can figure things out slowly but organically. But yeah, over time, things have changed. I figure as I learned more about systems and how things work, different languages approach different issues, and that's why you should pick them one or the over. Unless it's Ruby, don't pick Ruby. You can find better things.
Are there any languages in particular that when you were learning them sort of triggered that thought of, oh, I was wrong about this? Or is it too distant?
When I started to learn Golang, I thought this was one... It's always Go. And in my mind, it was like, this is the ultimate language. I don't need anything ever again. And everything can be built in it because it's so extremely fast. And then I started interfacing with databases in it and realized how badly it supports things like that because it's so structured and rigid that object-oriented models are too inflexible for it. And yeah, so that's when one of the things I sort of just like, all right, maybe this is not the best thing. Then I started building certain web servers in it, web APIs. And then the more the more need I had for representing proper objects and classes, inheritance, and all those beautiful concepts, the less I was like, oh, okay, maybe not. But when I was building a CLI, a Slack bot, a highly, like, extremely fast web server, which again, it just blows my mind to this day that I don't have to build a Python app, throw WSGI in front of it, have it hooked up to Nginx or Apache as a reverse proxy to have a high performance web server. I could just install a package on Go, run it, and it uses all the multi-threading, everything super fast, processing is great, and 90% of the time my biggest lag is the communication between the database and the app, even if they're hosted on the same machine. It's that fast.
Wow.
It's crazy how good this language
Yeah,
is.
yeah.
But yeah, I slowly learned that it has its limitations, and I had the same thing happening with Python when I was starting up. I figured it's so easy to type, it's basically pseudocode. Things are great, I love this, and then I realized on scale and so many other ways, it slows down or it almost has choice paralysis whenever you want to attack a problem. There's apparently 40 libraries, and you have to go through every single one of them, figure out what their pros and cons are, if there's documentation, and all sorts of different things. So don't be like me in the beginning. Don't be too opinionated or attached to a language. Keep them all in their little separate buckets. It'll probably benefit you in the long run of programming.
Yeah, and those were probably really good examples of languages to compare to. Just the fact that you chose something that's as structured as Go as one of your examples, where the most common error that we get from our web server that is running Go is like does not match JSON schema struct. So it's like you passed in a number and it wanted a string and it just throws up its hands and says I quit. Like full hard quit. It doesn't recover at all. Whereas you do that for a typical Python app, or especially if you've got something that's running JavaScript or something like that. It's going to figure out a way to not totally tip over at the point when it's parsing the code, which is when the Go one just throws up its hands. It's going to like try to run some stuff and see what happens. Whereas Go is like, no, you need to tell me what you're giving me, and then I promise to do it as well as I can. So yeah, they're very, very different languages for very different reasons. I could imagine that dealing with the strictness of Go would be a pain. I've only had to deal with it in small systems, so I haven't tried to use it to interface with a database, for example. But I also know that on the flip side of that, something that is, at least in vanilla Python, totally untyped as far as static typing goes, is a real pain, because you lack a lot of the stuff that you get even from something like TypeScript, which I have complaints about and will come up later. It limits your scalability in a different sense. You can't infer as much from just the code itself. So I guess good on you for learning stuff.
Yay, that's what we're here for. Doing better slowly over time.
Yeah. So my first one is pretty high-level meta type stuff of just life in general, which was
Wow.
Yeah. So before I became a developer, I was like, I just want to be a student or a professor forever so that I can just keep learning forever. And that was what I saw as like peak me, ultimate fulfillment in life is just learning stuff. And then I just found a career that requires you to learn, otherwise you get priced out of the market pretty quick. It's like you have how much experience and you're how bad. So you don't want that to happen. So you got to stay on top of it. And I think sort of on the flip side of that, anybody who wants to get into development and not just work at, I don't know, a WordPress shop or something that's very scoped and is getting in for a quote unquote easy job with good pay, they're going to have the inverse situation where they have to stay out of certain areas because they won't be able to keep up and learn. And then I'm having the opposite situation where I avoid those more scoped areas so that I can keep learning and am required to. So pre-dev realization, or I guess pre and post dev realization was this is a great career for anybody who wants to be a at least career long learner. And if you don't, it's possible, but it's going to be harder. So I'll go straight into the next one, because that one, like I said, was fairly high level, which is my changing opinion. I spent 6 months really hating TypeScript, and I've come to the conclusion TypeScript's not that bad. So now,
Wow.
if I were to choose between TypeScript and JavaScript, I would pretty much always, unless I have a really specific situation that I can't think of, go with TypeScript. And it has its issues, and those issues were things that I was very hung up on at first. So I'll start there. The things that I didn't like about TypeScript initially, because all the types are at compile time or write time, even not at compile time, they get removed at compile time, at write time, is they're all just a lie, essentially. Like, they don't exist at actual runtime. So if you give the application a number and it's expecting a string, it's just JavaScript at that point, and it doesn't actually know what to do anything different. So you get a bunch of benefits at write time of saying this function expects this, and if you're running your compiler and it's clearly from a one call site passing in a number and it's supposed to be a string, it will yell at you when it compiles that code, but then those types disappear, and the actual running code has to be JavaScript because browsers don't run TypeScript. And so I was like, all of this is a lie, it's all a facade, none of it matters. And that transitioned into, these are more or less like really useful comments, and they're just type annotations for the developer. They don't really have a benefit at runtime, but you get a lot of inference, which is really nice. So if you're using an IDE that supports it, you'll get automatic completion of a lot of stuff. You'll get prompts to tell you you're trying to do this, and that's not a good option. I also thought that they were simultaneously unnecessarily strict and unnecessarily broad, and this was kind of a misunderstanding. So you can't really do function overloading very well in TypeScript because of you can't have a polymorphic function. You have to say, like, how in Java, you can define a function a bunch of different ways and it will just pick the one that matches. That can't happen in TypeScript because it's JavaScript. It only has one function. So if you write the function and it expects these arguments, you have to use this whole generics type system to try to fit any polymorphism into that function. So you can't just say, if it accepts one argument, do this. If it accepts two, do this. So you have to write separate functions, which is fine, but it's a different strategy. And then when you try to do something that's a very generic function, like if you were trying to apply it to higher order functions that are accepting functions, it can become very difficult if it's supposed to be super generic. You essentially have to do, like, it accepts generic type T, which is then converted into an array of T. And you're like, that's fine until it gets more complex than that. And then you look at the types and realize this was supposed to give me, like, make my life easier, and I'm just now spending time fighting with the type system. Whereas without the types, you could just do like x, comma, dot, 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 x, and you're kind of good to go. You're like, whatever the arguments are, I'll just accept them, put them into an array, and then loop over them or do whatever I want. So I had issues with that, and then I realized it's just a matter of thinking about the code a bit differently, how you define your functions, writing those differently, and not thinking of TypeScript as an extension to JavaScript, thinking of it as a different language. And once I started doing that, it's like, okay, I can start to see the benefits here. I was trying to write TypeScript like JavaScript. It doesn't work very well. And I think it's a bad recommendation that actually everywhere that I've watched an introduction to TypeScript, it refers to as an extension of JavaScript, takes JavaScript code, converts it to TypeScript. I think that's fundamentally just a bad idea because, yes, it's you can just add types to JavaScript and it becomes TypeScript. But somewhere along the way, if you're thinking about it as JavaScript the whole time, it breaks down. And it doesn't take very long. And the other thing that I didn't like, and I still don't like because it's still broken, is TypeScript can't infer the value of a untyped function that's passed to another function. So if you have a callback, let's say you have a filter. So say you have an array and you call .filter on it, and you're doing x arrow function x, meaning it'll just automatically filter out all the falsy values, for example. If you want it to be more specific, x does not equal false, whatever. So filter out everything that's not false. So you know, looking at that code, what the possible values are that's left in the array. So the most common thing would be you'd have an array, you would filter out all the undefines or something like that. You now know that result has no undefines. Your code clearly says that. And you can even type the callback that you're giving to the filter function, and TypeScript still will tell you there could be undefines in this array. And you're like, I filtered them out right here, and I told you that that's what would happen. I told you that they were going to come in as number or undefined, and they would only return numbers, and it still says, I can't trust that because this doesn't run until runtime. But you have to do this stupid thing where you then do a type assertion, where you're like, I'm going to filter these all out, assign it to a new variable, and say as array of number. And at that point, it says, okay, if you promise that's an array of numbers. And so it hints at the thing that I mentioned earlier that I didn't like before, which was TypeScript types are a lie, and you can just tell it anything you want at any time, and it believes you. So you can just say this. You could literally have like string, like const s equals some string as number. I'm sure there's versions or like settings in TypeScript that'll yell at you, but like it'll essentially have to believe you because you asserted that was what the type was. And it'll probably tell you like you can't assign that value. But if it's coming in dynamically, it'll just trust you that, yep, it's a number because you said so. So I don't remember if I actually wrote a post about it or just thought about writing a post about it. But at one point I was going to write a thing that was TypeScript sucks, but you should use it. And
I think you wrote
essentially goes through those reasons. So, yeah, TypeScript. That was the thing I changed my mind about. It sounds like I still hate it, and I still do. But I thought it was bad. I thought it was worse than JavaScript, and it's clearly much better, especially for team-based stuff. Being able to tell other developers through types how to use something is really nice, and especially in React, when you're like, this is what the data looks like from the API. Don't assume otherwise. I wrote it in a data type. If it's yelling at you saying that you're using it wrong, it's because you're using it wrong. And it's great for that.
Yeah, it's I think that's the biggest selling point, right? Sure, there are issues in the runtime, and it's inevitable because of how the language and the compiler works. But most of the issues happen at developer level, and if you can somehow prevent those, then it's a win-win for everybody.
You pretty much don't see undefined as not a function if you're at least if you're intermediate writing TypeScript React code. Whereas that was very easy to do accidentally in JavaScript land because an undefined just bubbles up without you realizing it, whereas TypeScript will, unless you didn't type it as you were going. But if you type things as you're going, it'll let you know ahead of time, this is going to be undefined here. What are you going to do about it?
Yeah. And another, like, that really big distinction of not thinking of it as an extension to JavaScript and its own thing. Because when I think about it as JavaScript, I do this thing where I say, well, JavaScript doesn't care, so the type for this is any. And that's like all over my TypeScript. It's just I'm just like, I know what I'm processing and let it accept whatever you want, because at the end of the day, who cares?
Oh, it's just it's so painful.
Yeah. It just defeats the entire purpose of the language.
Yeah, and as soon as you put one any in, everything that interacts with that is now like as type unsafe as JavaScript. There's really no point.
Pretty much.
Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah. So don't do that. That's
Pro
bad.
tip.
Bro
Yeah,
tip.
don't do that. What's your next one?
Recursion.
Ooh, you've got my
I know.
attention.
I know. So I've had this thing since high school of I had this mindset that either things make sense to me and I'll be great at them, or they don't, and if they don't once, I will forever get into this mindset that this thing is stupid, or I am too stupid to understand it, and thus I should eliminate it from my life. With recursion, there was this always middle ground of I understand it, but I don't understand it. And it just kept going in this infinite loop, and there was no exit condition, and that was my life. Uh, until I truly embraced why they're useful. Because in my head, I always looked for the simpler, cleaner solution. So anytime it was doing that, I'd say, okay, I can just write an iterative solution for it. It's the same reasoning I used to give when I was learning different data types. So when they were like, there's linked lists, queues, stacks, I'd say, it's all just array. Why don't you just put everything in an array? You're making things more complicated than it needs to be. And as I grew as a developer and learned different things and how real world works and how useful these things are, I started to grow warm to recursion. I'm still not the greatest at it. I understand the concept. I can write pretty much any data type in it. But if given the choice of making a function recursive versus iterative, I think 99% of the time I will always go iterative, unless there's some crazy good performance boost I'm getting from recursion. Because in my mind, I still believe recursion is really just to make it sort of easier for the developer or to write the code in less lines. But iterative solution is where it's at. And yeah, sometimes for certain things, when you're like trying to go through the tails of things and iterating over complex data structures, the the iterative solution might look much uglier than the recursive solution would. So you have to still pick your battle. But I figured it was worth mentioning and admitting out loud that I have started warming up to recursion. Every time I study for interviews and everything, it makes sense. It makes things easier. It makes concepts a little less hard to follow. So long the exit condition is more explicit. But, and not to mention in programming, there's tons of recursive jokes, and then there's lots of recursive jokes, and lots of recursive jokes, and lots of recursive jokes. Yeah, so it's pretty great. Uh,
Yeah, the first step is admitting that you've changed your mind. The next
yeah,
step.
and that's the exit condition.
Yeah, I agree though. The point when recursion tends to shine is not when you're working with something that is just needing a loop. It's when you're dealing with recursive data structures, where you're essentially saying, if this were the only element in this tree, I would do this. But because it's not, let's just do it again until we hit a leaf node. And so you're essentially looking at a little tiny inner function of do this for everything. And then the for everything is handled by recursion. And oftentimes that's very easy to understand. And then if you do need something, like if you have a language that doesn't support tail call recursion or tail call optimization, then yeah, you might have space concerns. But oftentimes, if as far as interviews go, if they want a recursive solution, they'll tell you the size of data that you're going to get. Like, oh, it's going to have this many elements in it. You're like, all right, well, that's fine. We can handle that many items in the stack or whatever. Where if it's too big, yeah, you'll have issues with stack overflows.
Yeah, it's also one of those programming language concepts where until you understand it, you feel like an absolute idiot. And the moment it just clicks, you never go back. The clicking is so important, and once that happens, you just feel like this super smart genius person. And yeah, one day you're having imposter syndrome, next day you have a god complex, and that's just the world of programming, and it's pretty great.
When I tried to remember what it was like to not understand context, it was really hard. I was like, how would I explain this? And it was part of the reason why I made YouTube videos, because as soon as I really got a good handle on something, I would try to record a video as soon as I could. It was like when I first learned promises and how they were implemented in JavaScript. I was like, make the video right now, because this is the closest I'm ever going to be to remembering how confused I was 3 weeks ago. And now I've spent a lot of time with it and I get it and it clicked. Explain it now. Because now if I had to explain a lot of these more fundamental concepts like context or instance variables or something, I'd be like, how else can I explain this to you? It's an instance variable. There's an instance of the class and there's a variable in it. What else do I need to tell you? So, whereas at the time, I'm sure I could have gone through a huge explanation of this is how your brain works now, and it's how my brain worked, and now this is the other side that you can't go back from.
Yeah. Remember learning this?
That's what I'm saying, yeah.
It's just what is
Well,
this?
this did...
Context just always reminds me of like Java, like more on the Android developer side, because context is so thrown around there, so much used. And then in the JavaScript world or Python and stuff, it's mostly like this.
Well,
it's like,
yeah, self makes sense. This
or self.
This makes no sense.
It's whatever this is.
Yeah, but
where you are.
It can be set in 4 or 5 different ways, and it's so confusing.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's fine.
Anyways, but those are the things you learn.
Yeah. Yeah, that'll fix your imposter syndrome. Maybe not.
Maybe not.
Stay tuned for another
Just
episode.
have the God complex either way. Just fake it. Fake it till you make it.
It's pretty much what development's all about. That's actually something I changed my mind on. I used to think that you had to learn stuff. You don't.
It's one of my points.
Oh, well, there you go. Do you want to go to that? I don't have a ton. It sounds like you have a few more than me. If you want to go to that one
Oh,
next.
sure. Yeah, it's that I had this understanding of, because programming, when you're not in it, when you're on the outside world, seems like this really smart, perfect world full of engineers doing all these smart things, hackers sitting there and like, I've hacked the Pentagon. So when you enter the world, you're surrounded by all these really smart people. There's this fear that, or the understanding I had was, if I can pitch, because it's such a mind place, it's like, if I can pitch a perfect solution, even if it's not like I haven't coded it or it doesn't work in real life, it would be really smart and better than a really inefficient but working solution. And that, boy, that I have changed my mind on that. You could have something that's O log n, but if it works, it's better than your theoretical O to the 1 solution that is not generating any revenue, customers, or working software. So yeah, and that's one of the Agile manifestos too, right? Working software over planning and forever of just trying to figure things out. Yeah, and that's partially a good way to tackle imposter syndrome, because if you just get things working, no matter how bad it is, then you can improve upon it. And that is not a mindset I had, because in schools and universities, the mindset is you do it once and you get a perfect grade, or you fail and you go home. And that's the mindset I had for the longest time until I entered programming and got relatively not bad at it, was do things, make it better, and that's how you guarantee job security. Go into your code, put time.sleep all over the place, and then when they complain it's too slow, remove it, and now you're a genius. No one check my Git commit history, please.
So similar to that, my opinion changed a little, or my interpretation was similar but shifted a little bit. So it was like yours was in the beginning, where it's like you come up with a great solution and you implement it, and everybody's glad that that's how you wrote it. And then it went to, you start somewhere and you get the code running, and then from there you can figure it out. Into, I think, the difference between, early stage, intermediate / junior to where I am now, which is where I had some experience and had seen how things actually work, which is you write code instead of theory craft, to where I am now, where it's like, okay, how do you write a better first solution, which is a lot of focus on not writing the wrong thing, and writing something that's extensible from where you started. So in other words, before, like, the middle stage for me was write something and we can figure out how to make it better later, to being very careful not to try to predict the future, and at the same time trying to intentionally leave our future selves lots of space to make those decisions. Because the middle stage didn't involve thinking too much about, have I made this easy to work with in the future? It's, yeah, we'll make it better later. We'll figure out how to optimize it later, or we'll figure out how to add features to it later. And now it's, while we're building that first version, we don't know what it should look like eventually. So let's just make it easy on our future selves. And that's honestly most of the guiding principle. I've mentioned this abstraction for event logging in a few different episodes. And that was how we started, and it's why it's still working now, a year later. Our needs have changed, but we, at each stage, said, what do we need to have as existing behavior? And how can we leave this as open as possible from this point without trying to make guesses as to what we might need? And it's worked out great. Sometimes it does. Sometimes you still accidentally block yourself. But trying to imagine what it could be can, and without taking intentional steps towards that direction, can, at least I've found, help a lot. So that probably in the last year or two even has solidified for me more, and I'm sure in the next 2 years will solidify further as I get more examples. But it was something I didn't see a lot of living in front-end land, where everything's just components, and components are components are components. So if you need to refactor something, just make us another smaller component and load that. Just break it off into another component. It's too complicated. It's just a component. Split it into another component. It was very fractal.
And that's how it works.
That's how apps work. Yeah, they're all just fractals.
Components, yeah.
So
also, like, just an extension to it, the fact that you need to get things working as opposed to figuring out the perfect solution is also transferable to interviews. For the longest time, I believed if I enter an interview and I don't give them the right solution, regardless of how many YouTube videos, books, everything I've read, which are like, don't focus on getting the thing working. It would be nice if it did, but walk them through what you're thinking is more important. Which is something I didn't believe in at first. I was like, this is all bullcrap, none of this is true. And if my code doesn't work, why would they hire me? And that's when I realized it's not code who they're hiring, it's you. Took a while for me to realize that the problem solving is the important skill, not outputting code, because we have AIs now that can do that. So very important distinction to remember and always focus on. And I know if you're listening to this and thinking it's all bullcrap like I did, you'll probably end up at this stage sooner or later. So do it sooner and focus more on what your thinking process is and what you want to communicate, as opposed to thinking perfect solution in an interview will get you the job. It helps.
The God complex comes back. It's all about you. It's not about the code. That's right. They're hiring.
#humility.
They're hiring me.
They're hiring me. Yeah. Me and my brain, who is also me.
Yeah, it's all about you. So
always been you.
Always has been. So my next one is somewhat recent, and it's very specific to my current team, which is that feature flag development, or feature flag driven development, it actually seems to be working. So we'll have to see what happens in about a year, see if we just have a ridiculous increase in complexity with feature flag bloat because we failed to clean it up as we went. Hard to say, but at least a few months in, the initial impression is it's a whole lot better than I thought. So for those who don't know, feature flag driven development is essentially what it sounds like, where if you deploy your code, all new changes are behind feature flags. So observably, nothing in the application has changed. No behavior is different. Users wouldn't know that you deployed your code. And then it's up to product to decide, all right, now that this feature is fully built, we're told it's all out in production, available to us if we want it. We can now enable this feature flag and the feature turns on. So I thought this is very wishful thinking. Our code is going to become a big ol' if flag, else not flag, existing behavior mess. And so far it hasn't. We've had maybe a couple instances where it's a little more frequent of if conditions than I would like. But for the most part, there's a pretty easy entry point you can find to a new feature. And you're either saying, if the flag's on, use this new implementation. Otherwise, use the existing implementation. And surprisingly, when I push up new features, there will be 1, maybe 2 checks to see if the flag is on. And what's great about it is that I should practice this as part of this for future interviews. I implemented, pro tip for those if they missed that was talking about the team as a we instead of if you actually did it, you should be saying that you did it. So this is something not relevant to a podcast, but just generally, I need to practice this because I always do it wrong. But I set it up when I was implementing our test suite to use the new feature flags to also work with local development via a simple JSON file. So we can define whatever feature flags we want running in local development, and then it'll hot reload if you change them. The application reloads. Now you've got the new behavior. And so the process even of building a feature makes it very easy to swap back. So sometimes you'll be halfway through a feature and try to remember you come across something that's wrong and you have to go check a different environment, or you have to reload master to find out if this is a regression or something that was already in the existing behavior. Whereas with this, you just flip the feature flag back and you're like, what's it do right now? Oh, it was already like that. Perfect. Flip it back on. All right, I'll keep building my feature. And it's been incredibly convenient. We even had a bug fix go out that we're like, we're pretty sure this is how it works and we're pretty sure it'll make it better, but we're going to put it behind a feature flag. And we rolled it out to production. Nothing changed. The customer that was concerned about the bug, we turned it on just for them. And we're like, did it work? And they went, yep, all's good. So then we release it to everybody else. And product got to handle that. The devs weren't involved in the actual release to the customer's part, which is exactly what you want. You want the business side to be working with customers, not business to be telling customers that on this date at this time we'll be releasing these features, and then something goes wrong in the pipeline and they have to then reach out again and say, oh, that feature's not actually out yet. If they don't communicate till everything's already out and available and then they flip it on, things are way better. So just 10 out of 10. I was so surprised. Again, I thought this was going to just be a code nightmare, but the code's been pretty good. The actual process has improved a lot, and I'm just real happy about it.
Well,
especially as somebody who has
like
to do release manager stuff. I don't have to worry so much anymore about accidentally releasing stuff because it's all behind feature flags.
Yeah, it's all released.
Always has been. Exactly.
Yeah.
Oh, and then it solved our problem with cross-service dependencies. So we used to have to list out if somebody wrote something in a potentially, don't want to assume, but potentially non-backwards compatible way. Say that your server updates, or one service updates the API, the other service is consuming it. Maybe they don't write the consumer in a backwards compatible way. It's depending on the new service to have the new API, because we have one team that manages multiple services. Now, if it's behind a feature flag, you don't have to be backwards compatible. Either it's on and they're both on, or it's off and they're both off and they use the old behavior. So it's just been so great. My opinion was changed. 10 out of 10. Wow. This is actually what made me think of the episode examples. I was like, do I have enough examples? Yes, feature flags. And then I went from there.
Wow.
Yeah.
Sounds like it switched the happy flag in your head.
Yes, maybe that's why I'm feeling so good. Feeling good today because somebody enabled being happy as a feature.
Wow. Well, that product, you are a great product that should have that feature.
Wow. Thanks, Gyan. What's your next one?
It's actually still on the. I noticed that it's on also on the interviewing things.
Okay.
Um, new hot take that I have acquired this
Okay.
year
I like hot takes.
is, yeah, is you can say no in interviews. You can question the interviewer, yeah, and you like. So I had two assumptions. One, you can't ask a lot of questions because that makes you look weak and dumb, and you should just know everything that they're asking you. Because why else would they? They're not gonna hire the guy who's asking a lot of things. They're gonna hire the guy who has answer for everything. Everybody loves a know-it-all. That's the saying, right?
That's what everybody
Uh,
tells me. I mean, what?
exactly. And then the other one was don't question them. They've spent hours thinking about these interview questions, and of course, if they're asking, you must solve it in the way they have asked, or else you are just not fit for the skill. Again, it all ties back to they're trying to hire the way you think, not that they're your machine that's just executing commands. Unless that is the kind of company, and you may want to get away from it. Yeah, so yeah, that was the big lesson I learned that, and you can do it politely without being a bad person. So if they give you a question, you can just say, hey, what is the thing you're trying to aim at here, and what skills are you trying to find? Because I don't think this fully assesses the role and my expectations. And that seemed to work for me, even though the question wasn't changed. um, I was able to direct it more to the skills I wanted to know they were focusing on, as opposed to what other things I thought it would. It was slightly changed, not fully, but enough that I felt now confident moving forward with it because of what I thought they would assess. And of course, to show your thought process, validate assumptions, ask questions, clarify requirements. It's like interviewing 101. Go listen to our previous episodes. But the important distinction or thing I wanted to make up here is they are not the highest authority, they are a authority, and you can still question them and ask them because interviewing is a two-way street.
True that.
Yeah.
All right.
Yeah, I think that's all my interview ones.
Okay. I have another one. So,
Another one.
another one. Let me just see if I already covered this in our discussion about extensibility. No, not really. So, as some people will know, I went through a deep functional programming rabbit hole for a couple years and just really got into functional programming. And a lot of that influenced what I thought was a good way of writing code, which I still think is, but there's a caveat, which is not necessarily with other people. So I was under the belief at the time that the most important thing was to write code that was expressive, in other words, that kind of said what it did, was obviously correct if possible, and that what was the other thing I had a third thing that I used to think. I don't know what it would have been, but it was the most important thing was expressive, so like says what it does, and obviously correct, so like small functions that are composable, the whole functional programming ethos. And then I thought it was, after I got to that point, I thought sometimes my code is still wrong. This is a problem. And so I got really deep into testing. And I thought what's actually important, so it's not so important to write code that really well. It is, but what's more important is that you write really good tests. Because then the tests are so good that they'll at least make sure your code works the way you expect. And so I got into like property-based testing, which is big in functional programming, and unit testing, because functional code is really easy to unit test. And I thought, cool, if I just have all these examples in my unit tests, and then I have a property-based test, it's going to fill in those gaps with things I can think of. Now my code is going to be super good. And until you have to interact with the real world, that's kind of true. So I still think if you're writing an application that you can kind of put safety rails around and say like, this is the part that interacts with the real world, and then the guts of it are written in that way, you can still have a lot of success. But as it turns out, the real world is very messy, and you have to work with other people, which is a real pain. So I guess that kind of influenced it as well. Was my first job, I largely coded on my own for close to a year. And because I was just writing basic stuff, automating a lot of things. It was more or less a let's see if he can write code well enough to put him on the real team sort of process. And so I had a lot of time to work on those things that didn't interact too much with the real world. And it was a lot of, do I understand what this code does? Yes. And at some point I realized the most important thing with writing code with other people is not, is your code correct? Is your code expressive? Is your code easy to parse? It's, is your code what other people expect it to be? And that has been my like guiding principle for how I style my code for the most part these days, where if I have a variable name that seems to imply, like especially a Boolean, that makes somebody have to look at it and be like, all right, if not is underscore thing, I'm like, is there a way I can write this so that it's just like not using the not or whatever, just to make it easier for another person to look at this code and say like, oh, it does what I expect. If you have an early return and it's not the early return that you'd expect from the function name, for example, like, all right, I need to reword something here. I need to rearrange this somehow. It seems like I've had it before, for example, where the early return actually is kind of the default behavior. And so like, can I restructure this in a way that it doesn't look like that's the error condition where something went wrong, so I quit the function? And doing these sorts of things seem to have a much higher success rate for me on working with other people, because they're less likely to read your code later and introduce bugs because they misread it. They're less likely to ask you a bunch of questions when you push up a PR. And your code is just part of the zeitgeist a lot more easily. So that's been a big thing. And then after that, once the style is all sorted out, then I can worry about, now, is it doing exactly what I think it's doing? And as long as it is, that's where you can fill in your tests. And the tests are a lot more about writing things that's both expected, which is typically considered happy path type stuff, and unexpected. So if bugs came up, making sure you get test coverage on that bug, writing the test coverage in, and then fixing it so that the test passes. Those sorts of things are really good. Writing, if you come up with a case when you're developing the feature, you're like, oh, I accidentally passed this value to this API endpoint and it had this unexpected behavior. It's not really a bug, but it's not really... Write a test for it that says this behavior happens, and then if somebody comes in later and sees it, they're like, okay, we were aware of this. Maybe you leave a note that says like, this is why we left it this way. Do something, because then if they come to change it later, they remove that line of code that does that behavior, that test fails, they at least have to look at it and be like, all right, previous person thought this was real behavior, so they wrote a test for it to describe it, and then you can have a discussion about what it is. The nice thing about Git and everything is that you can then reference a PR where that change was made. And if you leave good commit messages, you can write essentially an explanation to a future person who's confused. But if you don't do any of those things, they never get to that PR with your message. So these were the big, hard-hitting realizations for me, because that's what I spend most of my time doing. Fortunately, I haven't been pushed over into management or anything yet. I still get to write code, and thinking about how other people are going to read it is a big deal, bigger than I thought it would be.
Yeah, because humans are the most expensive part of software development now. So if the talent understands what's going on, everything will be good. Everything will be jolly.
Yeah, and I'm sure there are dev shops that write more in the style I originally described. Like maybe if they use, Oh, I forget the name. There's a company here in town that writes in a Lisp language. Elixir? It might not even be a Lisp, but it's a functional programming language. Um, they might do something that's more like how I originally described, or if the company writes with Scala or something like that. But in the Python world of REST APIs that I'm mostly living in, there's a lot of stuff around it, but that's the core of the teams I've been on. There's an expected style, and adhering to that expected style is the most important thing for communicating with other developers. The more you veer from that, the more inherently confusing your code becomes for them just because it's unfamiliar. So
Yeah. And you'll probably get like spoken up during code review for situations like that.
yeah, exactly.
Yeah. Where they'll just comment, this is bad, or don't do this.
Yeah, the most helpful PR comments are the ones that just tell you that you're bad.
Yeah. If false, just using the Boolean false. This will always be false.
Classic.
Classic.
That was the last thing on my list.
Wow. Well, I got a few then.
Oh, cool.
Well, I guess they're all sort of related to work environments. So the biggest one is some context. There's this mindset in, I don't know if it's like anywhere in North America or not, but like mostly in Asia, and based on how I think previous generation worked, was there's this mindset of your employer is providing you with, they give you money or whatever and give you a place to go work, and because of that money you're able to feed yourself, your family, whatever. So there's this sense of ownership of like that I should be grateful for this job, but it's not in the way of, hey, I'm grateful for the opportunity I have. It's more that I owe this company my time and my energy or whatever. And that doesn't go both ways, because even though the company might care for you, if you died, they'll replace you within a week, very quickly. It's not even like, it's ridiculous how quickly you can be replaced at your job, regardless of how important you think you are, however you're maintaining everything. So biggest lesson I learned that changed my mind there is good to care about your job, good to care about your coworkers and everybody, but care about yourself more. And somehow, weirdly, that makes you better at your job. If you're looking out for yourself, you'll be most likely healthy and in a good mental state to take care of the said job and not get emotionally drained or attached or blamed or anything if things go wrong, or when things go wrong, because that's the real world we live in. That was a pretty big lesson or mind shift of, because every time I would I'm pretty sure for the first and the second job I was quitting, I had this huge guilt, gray cloud over my head of, why am I doing this? Maybe things can still work out. It's like almost leaving an abusive relationship where you're like, hey, this could be better, could be, right? You just have to remember it could be, maybe, but it is not, and you live in the present and leave and take care of yourself. And whatever resource the company needs, they'll hunt for it, they'll find it. Of course, I don't know, if you're the CEO and you leave, that's maybe worse for the company. But they'll eventually find a new CEO if you're not enjoying it and you hate yourself and your job.
Or if you're the only DevOps guy at that startup.
That's also very painful. It's it gets boring and sad, and I don't want to get into it. But yeah, that's a big one that I learned. And then something relevant to that is I used to believe sick days are for physical health only. So unless I have broken something, I'm super feverish, I should not be taking sick days. Thank God our world, or at least on the Western side, it's a little bit more open and mature at the fact of mental health is recognized to some extent. There is still a lot of stigma, but if you don't care very much, you can get a day off from your sick days for your mental health to take care of yourself. And if they say anything negative about it, you can shame them publicly because West Coast is awesome for that.
Oh God.
Ideally, you wouldn't have to, but your mental health is very important, and I didn't used to believe that. I'd just be in the mindset of, oh, suck it up, and that wasn't very healthy. So yeah, those were the two big ones. I sort of felt that. Anything to add?
No, I don't think so. I think I'm just more selfish because yeah, I don't care. I don't really care. I suppose it's more so the two companies I worked at. One of them just straight up went out of business before I could leave, so I didn't have to feel bad about that. And then the other one, I should have left before I started, so it was pretty easy to leave. Yeah.
Nice, nice. Um, yeah, and oh, another thing I learned was so there's this thing of, at least in tech that I've noticed, is working hard gets so prioritized in everything. So at least what I used to believe was it doesn't matter who I talk to, how many people I know in the company, or whatever connections I'm building. If I just keep my head down, do my work, be good at it, that's all that matters. I'm going to get through all the promotions, things will be good, and they'll throw all the money at me because I'm a good developer. And to some extent, that works out for developers because if they realize you're a good resource, they will try to do whatever to keep you. But a good, I would say, 80% of climbing the ladder or having more visibility into your progress and things you'll be doing is showing it off. And by showing it off, I don't mean like you walk in the office, you stand on your table, and you're like, here are the 10 things I did better than everybody else, and this is why I deserve everything. And a little drum set marches and sings for you in high pitch.
So that was
No,
off-putting. I
but
shouldn't have done that. Wow.
I enjoyed it,
Uh-huh.
but I don't think the company would have.
Okay.
Anyway, yeah, so I'm learning, especially as you move up a little bit more, who you know and how well they know your work impacts a lot more than just getting a whole bunch of work done, and not having any visibility for it. So that could be in the form of documentation, Jiras, and anytime you do something for another coworker or things you're going above and beyond for, document it and bring it up during your promotion cycles or whenever there is a review. Because if you think you worked that one weekend and your manager's going to remember that 6 months later because you put so much work into it, they're not going to. They have their own life. Just because you don't have one doesn't mean they don't. And that was a big revelation for me. I just thought everybody should know what I'm up to all the time and they should give me special treatment. And they didn't. So, so yeah, document things. Don't overwork and kill yourself on it. And socialize and get to know more people in your company and make sure there's visibility. Best way to get them to know you is by you showing the things you've done. Of course, it doesn't mean you're just like constantly going out for happy hours with your coworkers and you haven't built a feature in 4 months, and then you'll be like, but Sean, you really like me, and he'll be like, I do, but you're a shit employee, so bye. Uh, there's that balance, but the more important thing that I always had my mindsets fixed on was do your work, keep your head under, and things will work out. It doesn't work that way. Do your work, make sure everybody knows it, talk to everybody, and it will help you in ways. It's crazy the build up effect on that. Of they won't remember what you did 6 months ago, but because you made it available in visual, they'll remember you have a track history of getting stuff done, and that's what'll help you really get those reviews and recommendations going.
Yeah, there's a lot of stuff there, but it was all really good because, like, one of the things that I started doing a long time ago was when I worked on something that I thought I should bring up in a performance review was to actually write it down because they're not going to remember, but I'm not going to remember either. And so making notes as you go through the year is really valuable. I just, as I've said before, keep things in a Google Keep note, and it just grows throughout the year. And when I get to my performance review, I can pull it up and go, oh, yeah, I forgot about all those things I did. Let's remind my manager or whoever I'm speaking to. So those are really good. And public channels are really good as well. I wish it wasn't such a thing. This was like something that I was aware of, but I didn't want to be true. Whoever demos the code, if you're doing sprint demos, gets a lot of credit for stuff. And hopefully it's not a developer. So like right now, it's the product owner / scrum master, whoever's standing in for us in that meeting that day, who will do it. Everybody knows they didn't write the code, so it's fine. But if you have somebody on the dev team who's demoing stuff, no matter who built the feature, they get all the credit. And so even on when we've had to fill in at my current company, everybody knows that person A couldn't possibly have written all these different features, but if he's the one demoing them, he's associated with that feature. He got so much done this sprint. It's like, was he even here this sprint? Nobody knows, but he was showing it, so clearly he was associated with it. So if you have a rotation of people and you're skipping it because you don't want to be in front of people, be aware that you're really doing yourself a disservice for getting credit for development work. Even if you didn't demo that feature, or even if you didn't build that feature, if they're demoing other devs are demoing features that you built, take the opportunity when it comes up to do a sprint demo so that you can be associated with some code and people don't think that you don't get anything done. Because for some reason, that's how it works. And the other thing is public channels in Slack. Sometimes, if I just notice I have 5 or 6 open PRs that I need reviews for, I'll just throw them all in one message in Slack. And it happens infrequently enough that it's not, oh, he's just being annoying again. But it subtly tells everybody in that channel, oh, look at all this work. Nathan's just waiting for somebody to look at it. Why is nobody looking at Nathan's work? And that is the message that gets sent instead of Nathan didn't get his work done this sprint. What happened? So it's very different. Same reality, but 2 very different interpretations. One of them, they want to demo the feature and it's not done yet. The other one, they saw that there was 6 PRs up. Why is nobody getting around to reviewing Nathan's work? He's clearly doing a lot of work. It's ready. So these are the things that I wish weren't real, that just occasionally dip your toe in them, and it will benefit your image, so to speak, within the company. And that matters if you are doing good work. If you're not doing good work, I don't care. Hopefully you get fired or whatever. But if you're doing good work and people don't know about it, they don't know that you're doing the good work. So you just have to give them the opportunity to see it sometimes. Even if it's not your work, for whatever reason.
Exactly. As I read somewhere for like work things was, in the workplace, perceived reality is the actual reality.
Right. Oh,
that's what they'll remember.
Such a bummer.
Yeah, but that's how it works.
Yeah.
That's the another little one I had that I kept thinking if it's really a thing or not is, in the beginning, I believed everything should be, as far as databases go, everything can be solved by a relational database. You don't need NoSQL. Why do you live without structure? Who are you? What are we, lost in civilization? But that was very quickly changed because I only learned about the concept of NoSQL before actually using the databases. Mm-hmm. And once I used Mongo and stuff and looked at scaling problems and understood other things, once I understood the difference, it wasn't like it shifted a huge mindset. I just be like, oh, okay.
So
now I get
today,
it.
what's your elevator pitch for why you would want to use a NoSQL database now that you're converted?
Oh, because it's the best and relations are hard and committing is bad. It's 2021. Commitment is out the window. Okay? We will have eventual consistency and we will have streaming real fast data. And it will have no structure. And good luck, Golang writers.
Postmodern database. There you go.
Pretty much. No, I have no real elevator pitch. It'll be, let's walk to the boardroom from the elevator, figure out what you need to do, and pick the right database.
Yeah, fair enough. Look at this guy. There's proper discussion about decisions. Nuance.
Who wants that?
Not me. Not for a podcast. I want hot takes. Everything up before Mongo is bad. Everything after Mongo also bad. It's just Mongo.
Yeah. It's the worst thing since non-stuffed crust on pizza.
Oh.
Yeah, crushed pizza is that's like up there with garlic bread. So it's a nice big invention, and I don't know why we don't do more of it.
More stuffed crust.
Yeah,
Mm.
it's the only way I'll eat crust off a pizza.
Yeah, I've noticed.
Yeah. This is my hot take. Crust sucks and is useless, and we shouldn't be putting it without anything on the pizza. Just give me the middle slice with the content on it. And no, I don't cut off the sides of my sandwich either. Just in case you thought that's a transferable skill.
Okay, so you eat the whole piece of bread.
I do eat the whole piece of bread, but just because on the bread the crust is very thin and it's negligible. Same with thin crust pizza, I'll generally eat the crust.
So she probably
But in normal pizza,
she probably wouldn't want me to share this, but when my sister was very young, she would only eat to the edge of a burger on the other side because she said that was the crust.
I will texture that because I'll just be like, hey, you want to promote our latest episode? Listen to this.
Yeah, I would get so annoyed because I was such a pain as a little kid. And I'd be like, it's the same. If you had started from this side, it's the same. Just eat it. I don't know why it bothered me so much. Everything bothered me when I was a child.
But it sounds like you did better over time.
I hope so.
Yeah.
Yeah, growing up was.
What are you going to do better on this week then?
So, last week, as I mentioned, played a bunch of guitar, and that was good. I've just been playing a bunch of, I don't know, Bourri is how you pronounce it? Bourri in E minor, which is the first part of Classico, but Classico only plays the first little piece of Bourri, but I was like, I'll just learn all of it. And so that's been kind of fun. It's also making me just generally better at guitar, which has been nice. So I go back and play my other songs and realize this is way easier now. So maybe I'll finally be able to play Death of a Bachelor fingerstyle that I've been trying to learn for a long time, and it's too hard. So maybe I can learn it now that I'm slightly better. I mentioned I was going to do 3 leg days per week. Hasn't been a full week yet, so I've only gotten through 2 so far. But great success. Very happy with them so far. I was very sore after the first day. It's technically the first week of an accumulation block, so fairly low volume, but still I think 4 sets of 8 on squats, pause squats, which I hadn't done in a long time. And my legs let me know that I hadn't done that in a long time. And then did bike sprint intervals. I don't know why. It seemed like a good idea when I looked at the bike, and I felt so miserable. I was like kind of sick for a couple hours after, and I only did 4 minutes of work or something stupid. So bike sprint intervals are rough. I wrote down my monthly goals for August, which is just something I do each month. I don't normally mention it. And listen to some more database/Postgres content, as I said I would. So those things happened. Something that did not happen. I still didn't send more messages on Tinder because I'm the worst. So that's in my do better again. So I should actually do that. But on the other side of good things, I realized that because my gym doesn't require scheduling a session anymore, I can go back to what I used to do, which is not using an alarm. So the thing about having to schedule a session and being charged if you don't show up is you don't want to sleep through it. But now I don't have to worry about that. If I wake up this is what I used to do before. If I wake up in time, then I get ready and I go to the gym and I have a workout. And if maybe I don't fall asleep very well that night, or for whatever reason I sleep from 8 to 8 or something ridiculous, and I sleep through it, doesn't matter. Clearly I needed the sleep, and it sort of auto-regulates itself. And that's always worked really well. So I'm happy I made that realization, getting back into that phase. Maybe that's why I feel good today, because I've actually had a couple days of no alarm. I'm going to call my mom this week because it's been a few weeks. Should have called her last weekend, but I was feeling very tired after all the socializing, so figured I'd wait a week. She's getting her new porch installed, so I can hear about how the new porch came along, I guess, when I call her. And I mentioned food already. Sticking to my diet. So I dropped a couple pounds last month, which was the goal. And I'm going to intend to drop, I think I wrote down 1 to 3 pounds, which will probably net out to actually be anywhere from 3 to 5 total, and then regain a couple when I bring calories up to maintenance. But not just in this month. It'll be at some point in the next 6 weeks or so. But sticking to that, I need to keep my fats in my diet, because this is a mistake I've always made every time, and why I always feel like crap. This is actually the lightest I've gotten in years and still felt okay, because normally I accidentally remove all my fat from my diet and don't really realize it, because I just don't apparently pay attention to my how my food tastes. So I just eat all this stuff, and I realize, I ate like turkey burgers and vegetables and rice and oats and protein shakes, and none of those contain fat. And then I wonder why I feel like garbage. So I went to the grocery store and just hunted around for things that had fat in them and looked for variety. So I'm notoriously bad at not eating a variety of food. So I was just looking at things. I was like, does hummus have fat? How much fat is in hummus? And I was going to buy like hummus and some peppers. But then I didn't end up buying that because I found some other things I preferred instead, which was, one of them was 85% dark chocolate. So 4 squares of that has 20 grams of fat, which is perfect for in the morning before I go to the gym. I can just eat some chocolate, head to the gym. Felt real good about that. Good way to start the day. And picked up bag of roasted and salted almonds, also very good. Those olives, they don't have that much fat in them. I just, for some reason, was wanting to grab them, and they were delicious. And I picked up kefir, which I have drank off and on for years, and so that's always good. That's more so just because I try to get some sort of somewhat dairy product in my diet from time to time, so that I don't become totally incapable of eating dairy again, which happened when I was a student. So had that. And I have one more thing. I know I've been talking forever now, but the last thing, I'm doing this experiment. It's been about a week and a half, and it seems to be working, where I'm trying to train my middle distance vision. So I spend a lot of time sitting and standing at this desk, looking at a screen that's not very far from me. And I would go outside and try to look at things that were far away and just let my eyes relax. And I was like, this is supposed to be good for my eyes. And after a while, they would feel a little bit better, like they were a little bit refreshed or something, but I was still developing what seemed to be some level of eye strain, and my eyes just weren't very happy. Things were clearly not as good as they should be. And so what I started doing was going outside, never wearing my glasses when I'm out there, and trying to intentionally focus on things that were further and further away. And so it started with just sitting across the street and trying to read street signs, and I can always read them. The thing is that they're very blurry. It's like my eyes don't know how to focus on it. And so then over the course of the first 3 or 4 days, I noticed it went from every sign is always blurry, and I can see that it says Johnson Street, but I need to accept the fact that like the T is kind of smushed in with the rest of it, and it just doesn't look quite right. And then on like the 3rd or 4th day, suddenly my eyes would just kind of like go real blurry and then just fade in like they do at the eye doctor, where they're doing the eye thing where it goes blurry and then clear. And it would just, for at least a second before I blinked, everything would be crystal clear at that distance. And so I started realizing, okay, I can do this. I just need to figure out how to get my eyes to actually look that far. And so then I started practicing just looking at like this tree that's a little bit in front of me, and then the tree that's past that, and the tree that's past that, and then the building, and then the stop sign, and doing that more and more gradually. Seems to be the case that now I can walk out and see more distinction between letters on signs. I can notice the bark on trees from further away. I look across the street and I'm like, oh yeah, there's a lot of cracks in that building. Couldn't probably see them before without my glasses. So it seems to be doing something good, and I'm hoping that this whole stretching of the eye is going to help with eye health in general. So it's a weird one. I just decided to try it, and it seems to be working. But I'm going to keep doing that better.
I think I'm gonna expect an article soon which will be like, optometrists hate this guy.
Right. It's just going to be an ad with me, thumbs up, taking off my glasses.
Yeah. Stepping on them, that's your YouTube thumbnail.
Yeah.
How I made my eyes 10 times better.
Yeah.
Yeah. How to naturally lift eye gains.
From astigmatism to a stud, the Nathan story.
There you go. It's already approved. It's a great title.
What about you?
Not as much happening or cool things.
Yeah, mine was a bit excessive, to be fair.
It's important context. I need that. And I'm not saying that like sarcastically. That was kind of actually really interesting. In my did better, I did some cable management.
Okay.
So my stand-up desk there's nothing in the middle. It's just base and then floor, and then it can either go down or up. So all the cables behind it are just hanging in this whole block going down to my power adapter, and it looks messy, and it looks worse when it's in the standing mode because I'm lying on my bed looking at it and I just see this whole wire hanging off. So I did a little bit of cable management there. It's still in progress because if I tighten them too much, when it's going up, it can't relax enough to have the length properly built. And then I'm going to be soon making some more changes to my desk on how I'm putting peripherals where I'm putting them. And so that's going to cause much more problems if I don't cable organize them properly. So learning and figuring that out. Bought some more, again, the peripherals to make my desk better because I haven't worked at my desk in forever. My previous stand-up desk really sucked. So I would stand on it, take video calls and anything I needed. And then if I needed to actually focus, sit down, work, I would go sit on my kitchen table. And that was somehow the perfect height for any work done. And then I wasn't actually working standing. Luckily, most of my work in my previous job was a lot of meetings. So it worked out that I had a decent balance, but now I have a proper desk and I don't know how to work on it. So I'm just structuring things so that I can properly actually use it, be more focused, get work done. And yeah, that's part of my did better. My do better, which is part of my did not do better, is I thought I would have more time to focus on the social media for do better, and I didn't. So I'm gonna get back on that train, all the way back on, and get it done. Cause the more I put it off, the more our Instagram wall is just going to be yellow thumbnails. So just figuring things out, and I'll be getting help from a notorious 80% burger eater. So we'll see.
Sounds good.
Yeah, that's my do better. Hopefully by next week, there's gonna be a bunch of content on it. I know in one of the previous episodes I said I'm gonna try reels, and even just making them, I hated and cringed so much that I was like, this is not for me. I am not a reels maker. I'm just going to find our episodes, make them in clips, and post them as content instead of me, which is just not a good thing.
I don't suppose there's a way to disable Instagram from showing you reels, is there?
No, because reels is their new baby.
I know.
Reels, proper like first comment, hashtags, and that's pretty much it. That's how their engagement works. Doesn't even matter if you're just posting high quality photos.
Oh, I meant as a user. Everything I dislike seeing on Instagram is reels, and I would love to just not have them recommended to me anymore. But it's not an option.
The only way you can skip them is by not clicking on them.
Yeah. All right. Well, it was worth a shot.
Yeah. If any of our listener is from Instagram, put it as a feature flag. I think Nathan will appreciate it.
Yeah, and disable it for my user, please.
Yeah. Tune in for our next episode where we don't know what we'll talk about,
But you will.
Please tune
when
in.
You read the title.
Exactly.
See you then.
Thanks for listening.